Welcome back. This is the second video for Chapter 1. We're going to be looking at some of the principles of taxonomy in this video. Systematics, or the older term taxonomy, is that branch of science that deals with the naming and classification of organisms. Worldwide, taxonomists assign a unique name to each species of organism. They also describe a set of characteristics that distinguish that species from other organisms. Classification of organisms involves determining how the species are related to others. The scientific name of a species is consistently used among scientists worldwide, regardless of where a scientist is from or what language they speak. We all use the same Latinized scientific names. Species names are always binomials, in other words, composed of two words. The first name, for example, Homo, is the name of the genus an organism belongs to. The second name, for example, Sapiens, is the specific epithet. The scientific binomial for the human species is both words, Homo sapiens. Organisms are classified by placing them in a hierarchy of categories. Think of these categories as a series of nested boxes, with smaller boxes arranged in larger boxes. The more categories two organisms share in common, the more closely related they're considered to be. Let's start with the largest and most general category, domain. Taxonomists currently use 3 domains to classify all living things. These domains are archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Archaeans are single-celled, bacteria-like organisms. They are commonly called extremophiles because they often live in extreme environments. Bacteria are also single-celled, or colonies of cells. Some are pathogens, but others are beneficial. All plants, animals, fungi, and protistans belong to the third domain, eukarya. Pictured on top are 2 deep ocean hydrothermal vents. Bottom left is a hot spring at Yellowstone National Park, and lower right is the salt plains east of Alva. Archaeans can be found in living in these extreme environments. These are 3 examples of bacteria. The shape of cells is one characteristic commonly used to classify bacteria. Cocci are round bacteria, for example Staphylococcus, a very common bacteria on your body. Bacilli are shaped like little sausages. E. coli and the bacteria that cause tetanus and anthrax are bacilli. Spirilla are spiral-shaped. Chlamydia and Lyme disease are caused by Spirilla bacteria. The organisms you're most familiar with belong to the domain eukarya. One characteristic they all share in common is nuclei inside the cells. The nucleus is where most of the DNA, in other words, the genetic information, is located. Each domain contains 1 or more kingdoms. We're going to ignore the archaeans and discuss 5 kingdoms of organisms. The domain bacteria contains 1 kingdom called Monera. All bacteria, and also all archaeans, have cells without nuclei. They have DNA in their cells, it's just not separated from the rest of the cell in a different compartment, the nucleus. Cells lacking a nucleus are referred to as prokaryotic. All bacteria, and also extremophiles, are prokaryotic. The archaeans are in a separate kingdom, in part because their metabolism is so different from that of bacteria. These are examples of different kinds of monerans, in other words, bacteria. In the remaining 4 kingdoms, we'll discuss all belong to the domain eukarya. They all have eukaryotic cells, meaning they have nuclei. The protista are single-celled or have bodies that are composed of similar cells. They typically have very little or no tissue differentiation. Some are plant-like, for example algae, while others are animal-like, for example amoebas. These are examples of protistans. Above left is an amoeba. Top right, a euglena. Lower left is Spirogyra, sometimes called frog snot, and lower right is waternet. These are all examples of protistans that are commonly found here in Woods County. Fungi is the second kingdom in the domain Eukarya. Unlike protistans, fungi are almost always multicellular with cellular specialization. Like plants, their cells are surrounded by a cell wall. Like animals, none of them can do photosynthesis. They typically feed on the bodies or the remains of other organisms. Plantae is the third kingdom in the domain Eukarya. Like fungi, plants are eukaryotic, multicellular, and have cell walls. They have more specialization with easily distinguishable tissues and organs. Unlike the fungi, they typically are capable of doing photosynthesis. The last kingdom we'll discuss is Animalia. All animals, including humans, belong to this kingdom. They're eukaryotic, multicellular with different tissues. They do not have cell walls and cannot do photosynthesis. Continuing with our taxonomic categories, each kingdom contains one or more phyla. Phyla are divided into classes. Each class has one or more orders. Orders contain families. Families are divided into genera. Each genus contains one or more species. With this table, I hope to illustrate more about the hierarchy of taxonomic groups. I've included 4 species: humans, chimpanzees, mallard ducks, and wild roses. The more categories 2 organisms share in common, the more closely related they are. Of these 4 organisms, humans and chimpanzees are the most closely related. Which is the least similar of the 4? Also notice, once 2 taxa diverge, all categories below must also be different. I would like to end this video with 3 terms your textbook author included in this chapter. We'll discuss these further later in the semester. Adaptation is used as a noun or a verb. As a verb, adaptation is the process of a species acquiring new characteristics which help it survive and or reproduce in an environment. Used as a noun, adaptation is the beneficial characteristic. Biodiversity is a measure of the number of different species in an area and their relative abundances. Ecologists are concerned about biodiversity because increased biodiversity is often associated with increased ecosystem stability. Evolution is a change in the genetic composition of a population. Populations evolve, not individuals. Changes in genetic composition result in the accumulation of new characteristics, in other words, new adaptations. This completes video 2 for chapter 1.